They say breaking a mirror brings 7 years of bad luck. I never believed it until it happened to me. It was just another Friday, or so I thought. I woke up late, spilled coffee on my favorite blouse, and nearly missed my bus to work. Little did I know, these minor inconveniences were just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume my life for years to come. I rushed into the office, my heels clicking against the polished floor as I made my way to my desk. My co-worker, Sarah, greeted me with a sympathetic smile. "Rough morning." I nodded, dropping my bag and collapsing into my chair. "You have no idea. Is it Friday the 13th or something?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Actually, yeah, it is." I laughed it off, dismissing the superstition. But as I reached for my compact mirror to fix my wind-tousled hair, my elbow caught the edge of my coffee mug. The ceramic shattered on the floor, sending shards of porcelain and droplets of coffee flying everywhere. "Oh, for heaven's sake," I muttered, bending down to clean up the mess. As I gathered the broken pieces, my compact mirror slipped from my lap and clattered to the ground. I picked it up, my heart sinking as I saw the spider web of cracks across its surface. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at my fractured reflection. 7 years of bad luck, the old superstition echoed in my mind. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. It's just an old wives' tale, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. It started small, misplaced keys, stubbed toes, missed calls. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But then things began to escalate. A week after breaking the mirror, I received a call from my bank. There had been suspicious activity on my account, and someone had drained my savings. I spent hours on the phone, trying to sort out the mess, my stomach churning with anxiety. The next month, I was passed over for a promotion I'd been working towards for years. My boss called me into his office, his expression grim. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting my eyes. "We decided to go with someone else." I nodded, fighting back tears as I left his office. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face, trying to compose myself. As I looked up, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw the same spiderweb of cracks from my broken compact. I blinked, and the image was gone. Summer rolled around, and I decided to take a vacation, hoping to shake off the cloud of misfortune that seemed to be following me. I booked a trip to a tropical paradise, dreaming of sun-soaked beaches and crystal-clear waters. But even paradise couldn't escape my streak of bad luck. My luggage was lost, my hotel reservation was somehow canceled, and on the second day, I came down with a severe case of food poisoning. As I lay in the unfamiliar hospital bed, hooked up 2 and 4, I couldn't help but wonder if this was all connected to that fateful Friday the 13th. Back home, things only got worse. My car broke down on the highway during rush hour, leaving me stranded for hours. My apartment flooded due to a burst pipe while I was at work, ruining most of my possessions. Even my relationships seemed to be affected. Friends drifted away, dates ended in disaster, and family gatherings became tense and uncomfortable. I tried everything to break the streak of bad luck. I carried good luck charms, avoided walking under ladders, and even consulted a psychic. Nothing seemed to work. The shadow of misfortune continued to loom over me, growing darker with each passing day. As the months turned into years, I became a shell of my former self. Paranoia crept into every aspect of my life. I second-guessed every decision, afraid of triggering another catastrophe. My once vibrant social life dwindled to nothing as I isolated myself, too afraid of what might go wrong if I ventured out. It was nearing the end of the 6th year when I hit rock bottom. I'd lost my job due to company-wide layoffs. My last remaining close friend had moved away, and I was facing eviction from my apartment. Sitting alone in my dimly lit living room, surrounded by past due notices and empty takeout containers, I felt utterly defeated. I caught a glimpse of myself in the dusty mirror hanging on the wall. My reflection looked haggard, with dark circles under my eyes and a perpetual frown etched onto my face. As I stared, the memory of that broken compact mirror on Friday the 13th flashed through my mind. Something inside me snapped. In a fit of frustration and despair, I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy paperweight, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a satisfying crash, pieces raining down onto the carpet. As the dust settled, I stood there, breathing heavily, surrounded by the broken shards. To my surprise, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was as if the act of breaking the mirror had released something, some invisible force that had been clinging to me all these years. In that moment, I made a decision. I was done being a victim of superstition and bad luck. I grabbed a broom and dustpan and began cleaning up the mess, my mind racing with plans. I would take control of my life again, starting right now. The next day, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I polished my resume, reached out to old contacts, and started applying for jobs. I deep-cleaned my apartment, donating things I no longer needed and creating a fresh, organized space. I even called up an old friend I'd lost touch with, apologizing for my absence and suggesting we meet for coffee. To my amazement, things started to turn around. I landed an interview for a promising position. My landlord agreed to give me an extension on my rent, and my friend was overjoyed to hear from me. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still challenges and setbacks, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward instead of being trapped in a cycle of misfortune. As the 7th anniversary of that fateful Friday the 13th approached, I found myself both anxious and hopeful. Part of me still clung to the superstition, wondering if the curse would finally lift when the 7 years were up. But another part, the part that had been growing stronger over the past few months, knew that the real change had come from within me. The night before the anniversary, I sat on my balcony, watching the sunset and reflecting on the journey of the past 7 years. I thought about all the hardships I'd faced, the lessons I'd learned, and the strength I'd discovered within myself. I realized that while I couldn't control everything that happened to me, I could control how I responded to it. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, marking the start of a new day and the end of the 7-year cycle, I took a deep breath. Whatever happened next, I was ready to face it head on. I got dressed and headed out, my steps light and purposeful. As I walked down the street, I passed a small antique shop I'd never noticed before. In the window display, something caught my eye, a beautiful, ornate hand mirror. Without hesitation, I went inside and bought it. Back home, I carefully unwrapped the mirror and held it up, examining my reflection. The face that looked back at me was different from the one I'd seen in that broken compact 7 years ago. This face was older, yes, but also wiser, stronger, and more at peace. I smiled at my reflection, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt truly lucky, not because some curse had been lifted, but because I had lifted it myself. I had faced my fears, overcome my doubts, and reclaimed my life. As I placed a new mirror on my dresser, I made a promise to myself. From this day forward, I would create my own luck, good or bad. I would face whatever life threw at me with courage and resilience. After all, the only real curse is the one we allow to control us. I turned away from the mirror, ready to start the next chapter of my life. Whatever it held, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let superstition or fear hold me back ever again. The future was mine to shape, and I intended to make the most of it. Broken mirrors be damned. The old hospital stood silent in the moonlight, its weathered brick facade hiding secrets I was about to uncover. I never believed in ghosts or superstitions, but after my first night as a security guard at St. Mary's, I wasn't so sure anymore. It was Friday the 13th when I started my new job. I remember chuckling at the date as I signed my employment papers. If only I'd known then what I know now, I might have walked away and never looked back. The night started quietly enough. I arrived at 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes before my shift began. The day guard, a grizzled old man named Frank, gave me a quick tour of the security office. "Here's where you'll be spending most of your time," he said, gesturing to a bank of monitors. "Cameras cover most of the building, but there are a few blind spots. Don't worry too much about those." I nodded, taking it all in. The office was small and cluttered, with decades-old posters about safety protocols plastered on the walls. The air smelled of stale coffee and dust. Frank handed me a set of keys and a flashlight. "You'll need to do rounds every 2 hours. Just a quick walk through each floor to make sure everything's in order. Any questions?" I shook my head, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was my first night shift job, and I was eager to prove myself. "All right then," Frank said, heading for the door. "Good luck, kid." "Oh, and stay out of the East Wing. It's been abandoned for years, and the floor's not too stable." With that ominous warning, he left me alone in the quiet building. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I watched the monitors, did my first round, and settled in with a book to pass the time. It was around 2 a.m. when I first noticed something odd. A flicker of movement caught my eye on one of the monitors. I leaned in, squinting at the grainy black and white image. It looked like a shadow passing through an empty corridor on the 3rd floor. I rubbed my eyes, assuming it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. But then I saw it again, this time more clearly. A dark figure, moving with purpose down the hallway. My heart rate quickened. I wasn't supposed to leave the security office except for scheduled rounds, but I couldn't ignore this. I grabbed my flashlight and keys, heading for the elevator. The 3rd floor was eerily quiet when I stepped out. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting harsh shadows in the empty hallways. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast space. "Is anyone there?" No response. I continued down the corridor, shining my flashlight into each room I passed. Empty beds, abandoned medical equipment, and silence greeted me at every turn. I was about to give up and head back to the office when I heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from around the corner. I froze, listening intently. There it was again, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Taking a deep breath, I turned the corner, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. What I saw made my blood run cold. A wheelchair stood in the middle of the hallway, its wheels slowly turning, as if someone had just vacated it. But there was no one there. I approached cautiously, my hand shaking as I reached out to touch the chair. It was ice cold. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the hallway into darkness for a split second. When they came back on, the wheelchair was gone. I ran back to the security office, my heart pounding in my chest. As I burst through the door, I noticed something on one of the monitors that made me freeze. The camera feed from the 3rd floor hallway showed the wheelchair, exactly where I'd seen it. But as I watched, it moved on its own, rolling down the corridor and disappearing around a corner. I spent the rest of the night glued to the monitors, but nothing else unusual happened. When Frank arrived to relieve me in the morning, I was a nervous wreck. "Everything okay, kid?" he asked, eyeing me suspiciously. I hesitated, then decided to tell him what I'd seen. To my surprise, he didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, he nodded solemnly. "You're not the first to see strange things here," he said. "This place has a history, but as long as you stay out of the East Wing, you should be fine." His words did little to comfort me, but I needed this job. So, I steeled myself and came back the next night and the night after that. For a week, nothing out of the ordinary happened. I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole wheelchair incident when things took a turn for the worse. It was another quiet night. I was doing my 2 a.m. round when the lights started flickering again. This time, they didn't come back on. The emergency generators kicked in, bathing the hallways in a dim, reddish glow. I reached for my radio to call maintenance, but all I got was static. That's when I heard the whispers. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a chorus of indistinct voices just on the edge of hearing. I spun around, trying to locate the source, but the sound seemed to move with me. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. "Is anyone there?" The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I could almost make out words now, but they were in a language I didn't understand. Panic rising in my throat, I started walking quickly towards the elevator. But as I rounded a corner, I found myself face to face with a set of double doors I'd never seen before. They were old, made of heavy wood with peeling paint. A faded sign above them read, "East Wing." My breath caught in my throat. This was a forbidden area Frank had warned me about. But how had I ended up here? I was sure I'd been heading in the opposite direction. As I stood there, frozen with indecision, the whispers suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, the doors began to open. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot. Through the widening gap, I could see a long, dark corridor stretching into the distance. The air that wafted out was cold and stale, carrying the faint scent of decay. Something moved in the darkness beyond. A figure, tall and unnaturally thin, stepped into view. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its gaze fixed on me. I stumbled backward, finally breaking free of whatever force had held me in place. I ran blindly through the halls, no longer caring about direction or protocol. I just needed to get out. I burst into the security office, slamming the door behind me. My hands shook as I tried to catch my breath. When I finally looked up at the monitors, what I saw made my heart stop. Every screen showed the same image, the open doors of the East Wing, with that tall, dark figure standing just inside. As I watched, it raised a hand, beckoning to me. I don't remember much of what happened next. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, Frank was shaking me awake. Sunlight streamed through the small window, and the monitors showed nothing but empty hallways. "You okay, kid?" Frank asked, concern etched on his face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth to tell him everything, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain what I'd experienced without sounding crazy? In the end, I just shook my head and mumbled something about not feeling well. Frank gave me a long, searching look before nodding. "Why don't you take a few days off?" he suggested. "Clear your head." I nodded gratefully, gathering my things to leave. As I reached the door, Frank called out to me, "Oh, and kid, whatever you do, stay out of the East Wing. Some doors are better left closed." I turned to ask him what he meant, but he was already busy with the monitors, acting as if he hadn't said anything unusual. As I walked out of the hospital into the bright morning sun, I couldn't shake the feeling that I brushed up against something beyond my understanding. The memory of that dark figure and its beckoning hand lingered in my mind. I knew I should quit, find a nice, normal day job where the only thing I had to fear was a grumpy boss or a malfunctioning coffee machine. But deep down, I knew I'd be back. The East Wing held secrets, and despite my fear, or perhaps because of it, I felt drawn to uncover them. Next Friday the 13th was only a few months away. Something told me it would be a night to remember, whether I wanted to or not. I had a feeling my journey into ST, Mary's Mysteries, was just beginning. As I drove home, the hospital loomed in my rearview mirror, its windows glinting in the morning light. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a tall, dark figure watching me from one of the upper floors. I blinked, and it was gone, but I knew it was still there, waiting. And on my next shift, I'd be ready to face whatever lurked in the shadows of ST, Mary's abandoned East Wing. The forest seemed to breathe around me, its ancient trees creaking in the wind as darkness crept through the underbrush. I was alone and lost, and the realization that I might not make it out alive was starting to sink in. How could a simple day hike have gone so terribly wrong? It all started on what should have been an ordinary Friday. I woke up early, excited for a day of solitude and nature. As I packed my backpack, I noticed the date on my phone, Friday the 13th. I chuckled, never one to be superstitious. If only I'd known then how that day would unfold. The trailhead was deserted when I arrived, which wasn't unusual for a weekday. I signed the trail register, noting my planned route and expected return time. The crisp morning air filled my lungs as I set off, my boots crunching on the gravel path. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. The trail wound through lush forests and opened up to stunning vistas. I stopped often to take photos, marveling at the untouched beauty around me. It was during one of these photo stops that things started to go wrong. I had stepped off the main trail to get a better angle of a particularly picturesque waterfall. As I framed the shot, movement caught my eye. A deer, barely visible through the foliage, watched me with wary eyes before bounding away. Without thinking, I followed, hoping to capture it on camera. It wasn't until the deer disappeared and I turned back that I realized my mistake. The trail was nowhere in sight. I wasn't worried at first, confident I could retrace my steps. But as minutes turned to hours, panic began to set in. The sun was high overhead now, filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns. I tried to use it to orient myself, but the dense forest made it difficult to get my bearings. My phone, which I'd been using as a camera, chose that moment to die. I cursed myself for not charging it fully before leaving. As afternoon wore on, the forest seemed to close in around me. Shadows lengthened, and the cheerful birdsong of morning gave way to the more ominous calls of evening creatures. I tried to stay calm, remembering the survival tips I'd read in hiking magazines. Find water, stay in one place, signal for help. But with no supplies beyond a half-empty water bottle and a few granola bars, my options were limited. I decided to try and find higher ground, hoping to spot a landmark or maybe get cell signal. The climb was steep, and briars tore at my clothes. By the time I reached a small clearing, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Any other time, I would have found it beautiful. Now, it only filled me with dread. Night fell quickly in the forest. The temperature dropped, and I shivered in my light jacket. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf made me jump. Were there bears in these woods? Mountain lions? My imagination ran wild, conjuring terrifying scenarios. I tried to start a fire, remembering the matches in my pack. But the forest floor was damp from recent rain, and my city dweller skills were no match for the wilderness. After an hour of frustration, I gave up, huddling instead at the base of a large tree. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by strange noises and vivid, fear-induced dreams. I dreamt of search parties passing just out of earshot, of circling back to the trailhead only to find my car gone, of dark shapes moving just beyond the tree-line. Dawn brought a temporary relief from the terrors of the night, but it also brought the harsh reality of my situation. I was lost, alone, and running out of water. The granola bars were gone, and hunger gnawed at my stomach. I decided to start moving again, hoping to find a stream or river. Water would not only quench my thirst, but might also lead to civilization. As I walked, I tried to leave marks, broken branches, piles of stones, anything that might help rescuers find me or prevent me from going in circles. The day wore on, each hour blending into the next. My feet ached, and scratches from thorny bushes stung my arms and face. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming yesterday, now felt alien and hostile. It was mid-afternoon when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, but there it was again, the distant whop-whop-whop of helicopter blades. They were looking for me. I ran towards the sound, stumbling over roots and rocks in my haste. I shouted until my voice was hoarse, waving my arms wildly even though I knew the dense canopy would hide me from view. The sound grew louder, then fainter, then disappeared altogether. I collapsed to the ground, tears of frustration and fear streaming down my face. As the light began to fade once more, I knew I had to find shelter for the night. That's when I saw it. Barely visible through the trees, the dark shape of a structure. My heart leapt. A ranger station? A hiker's cabin? I approached cautiously. As I got closer, my excitement turned to unease. This was no ranger station. It was an old cabin. Its wood weathered gray with age. Windows, cloudy with grime, reflected the last rays of sunlight. The porch sagged, and half the roof had caved in. Everything about the place screamed, "Stay away." But as darkness fell and the temperature dropped, I knew I had no choice. It was this or another night exposed to the elements. The door creaked ominously as I pushed it open. The interior was musty and thick with dust. Old furniture, rotting and cobweb-covered, cast strange shadows in the dim light. But it was shelter, and right now, that was all that mattered. I cleared a space in the corner, as far from the caved-in section as possible. Using some old newspapers I found, I managed to start a small fire in the ancient potbelly stove. The warmth was heavenly, and for the first time in 24 hours, I felt a glimmer of hope. As I huddled by the stove, my eyes began to adjust to the gloom. That's when I noticed the writing on the walls. At first, I thought it was just graffiti left by other hikers. But as I read, a chill ran down my spine. The scrawled messages spoke of something in the woods, something that lured hikers off the trail. They told of lost time, of circling back to this cabin again and again no matter which direction they walked. The most recent message was dated just a month ago. I told myself it was just a sick joke, other lost hikers trying to scare whoever came after them. But a part of me wasn't so sure. I thought of the deer that had led me off the trail, of the strange dreams that had plagued me. Was there something out there, something that didn't want me to leave? A noise outside made me freeze. Footsteps on the creaky porch. A shadow passed by the grimy window. My breath caught in my throat as the door handle slowly turned. The door swung open, and I braced myself for the worst. But instead of some forest monster, a beam of light hit my face, momentarily blinding me. "We've got a live one," a gruff voice called out. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a man in a park ranger uniform standing in the doorway. Relief flooded through me, so intense it made me dizzy. The next few hours passed in a blur. I was wrapped in a warm blanket, given water and food, and led out of the forest. The ranger explained that they'd been searching for me since I failed to return to my car the previous evening. As we drove back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd escaped something more than just a night in the woods. The cabin, the writings on the wall, the strange occurrences, it all seemed like a half-remembered dream. The ranger must have noticed my unease. "You're not the first to get turned around in these woods," he said kindly. "There's something about this place that plays tricks on the mind, but you're safe now." I nodded, but I wasn't entirely convinced. As we drove past the trailhead where my hike had begun, I could have sworn I saw something watching from the tree line, a deer, standing unnaturally still, its eyes reflecting the headlights with an almost human intelligence. I blinked, and it was gone, but the memory lingered, along with a certainty that I would never look at a forest trail the same way again. Some paths, once taken, change you forever, and some wildernesses are better left unexplored. I never should have stopped that night, but there it was, a gleaming red beacon in the darkness, impossible to ignore. An abandoned car on a lonely road might seem like the start of a cliché horror story, but trust me, the reality was far worse than anything Hollywood could dream up. It was a crisp autumn evening, Friday the 13th to be exact, though I didn't realize the date at the time. I was driving home from a late shift at the diner where I worked, taking the scenic route through the countryside. The winding back roads were deserted, which wasn't unusual for this time of night. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the yellow lines on the road and the dense forest on either side. The radio crackled with static between songs, adding to the eerie atmosphere. I was just thinking about switching it off when I saw it. A car, parked haphazardly on the shoulder of the road, its hazard lights blinking steadily. As I got closer, I could see it was a cherry red sports car, the kind that stood out like a sore thumb in our small town. I slowed down, peering through the windshield for any sign of the driver. The car was empty. I should have kept driving. Every instinct told me to put my foot on the gas and leave this mystery for someone else to solve. But something made me pull over. Maybe it was my innate need to help, or maybe it was simple curiosity. Whatever the reason, that decision changed everything. I parked a few yards behind the sports car and got out, the gravel crunching under my feet. The night was silent except for the rhythmic clicking of the hazard lights and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. "Anyone there? Do you need help?" No response. I approached the car cautiously, my phone's flashlight illuminating the way. The driver's door was slightly ajar, and I could see the keys still in the ignition. A quick glance inside revealed nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of struggle, no personal belongings left behind. It was as if the driver had simply vanished into thin air. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but there was no signal. Typical. I'd have to drive to the nearest town to report it. As I turned to head back to my car, something caught my eye. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw tire tracks leading off the road and into the forest. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow them. Just a quick look, I told myself. Maybe the driver had gone for help and gotten lost. The underbrush was thick, branches scratching at my arms as I pushed through. The tire tracks were clear in the soft earth, leading deeper into the woods. After about 5 minutes of walking, I came to a small clearing. What I saw there made my blood run cold. In the center of the clearing stood an old, rusted-out car. It was the same make and model as a shiny red sports car on the road, but this one looked like it had been there for decades. The paint was completely gone, replaced by a thick layer of rust. Weeds grew up through the floorboards, and the windows were clouded with age. I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. There, barely visible under the layers of rust and grime, was a hint of red paint. It was impossible. The car I'd seen on the road was brand new, its paint gleaming under the streetlights. This wreck looked like it had been abandoned half a century ago, and yet, I peered through the grimy window, half expecting to see a skeleton behind the wheel. Instead, I saw something that defied explanation. The interior of the car was pristine. The leather seats looked new. The dashboard was dust-free, and there on the passenger seat was a smartphone, its screen glowing softly. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. None of this made sense. I needed to get out of there, to call the police, to do something, but as I turned to leave, I realized with growing horror that I couldn't remember which way I'd come from. The forest looked the same in every direction, a wall of dark trees closing in around me. I spun around, desperately searching for any sign of the path I'd taken, but it was gone. The only thing I was certain of was the rusted car, sitting silently in the center of the clearing, like some bizarre anchor in a sea of confusion. I don't know how long I wandered through those woods, calling for help until my voice was hoarse. Hours blended together, and the darkness seemed to deepen with each passing minute. Just when I was about to give up hope, I saw lights through the trees. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled towards the road. But as I broke through the tree line, my relief turned to confusion, then to fear. I was back where I started. There was my car, parked exactly where I'd left it. And there, a few yards ahead, was the abandoned red sports car, its hazard lights still blinking steadily. It was as if the past few hours hadn't happened at all. But the scratches on my arms and the leaves in my hair told a different story. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys in my haste to get away from this nightmare. As I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing my mind? I decided not to tell anyone about my experience. Who would believe me anyway? But the story doesn't end there. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. The red sports car, parked in different locations around town, always empty, always with its hazard lights on. I'd blink, and it would be gone, leaving me to question if I'd really seen it at all. Then I started seeing it near my house, at the end of my street, in the parking lot of the grocery store where I shopped, outside the diner where I worked, always just at the edge of my vision, disappearing when I tried to get a closer look. I became paranoid, jumping at every flash of red I saw. My friends noticed my odd behavior, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How could I tell them that I was being haunted by a car? It was a month after my encounter in the woods when things came to a head. I was driving home late one night, the same route I'd taken that fateful evening. As I rounded a bend, my headlights illuminated a familiar sight. The red sports car, parked on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. My heart raced as I slowed down, a sense of déjà vu washing over me. But this time, something was different. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat. I pulled over, my curiosity overcoming my fear. As I approached the car, the driver's door opened slowly. A figure stepped out, shrouded in shadow. I called out, asking if they needed help. The figure turned towards me, and I felt my world tilt on its axis. It was me, an exact copy, down to the clothes I was wearing and the bewildered expression on my face. I stumbled backward, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. The other me smiled, a cold, empty expression that sent chills down my spine. It spoke, its voice an eerie echo of my own. "Your turn to drive," it said, gesturing towards a sports car. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, back to my car, my sanctuary. As I sped away, I could see in my rearview mirror the other me, standing in the middle of the road, watching me leave. I drove straight to the police station, my story spilling out in a frantic, jumbled mess. They listened patiently, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They took my statement, promised to look into it, but I knew they didn't believe me. As I left the station, my eyes were drawn to the parking lot. There, in a spot near the entrance, was the red sports car, empty, hazard lights blinking. I don't know what happened that night in the woods. I don't know if what I've been seeing is real or if I'm slowly losing my grip on reality. All I know is that every time I see that car, a part of me wants to get in and drive, to see where it might take me. But a bigger part of me is terrified of what I might find at the end of that journey. So I keep driving my own car, taking different routes home, always watching for a flash of red in my peripheral vision, always wondering if tonight will be the night I see myself again, offering me the keys to a mystery I'm not sure I want to solve. So if you're ever driving down a lonely road at night and you see a red sports car with its hazard lights on, just keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look back. Because some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some journeys have no return ticket. The moment I realized I wasn't alone in the office, it was already too late. The elevator doors had closed behind me, sealing my fate for what would become the longest night of my life. It was supposed to be a simple task. Stay late, finish the project, impress the boss. Little did I know that by the time the sun rose, I'd be questioning everything I thought I knew about my workplace, my colleagues, and my own sanity. The day had started like any other Friday. I arrived at the office, coffee in hand, nodding to the security guard as I badged in. The usual buzz of keyboards clicking and phones ringing filled the air as I settled into my cubicle. But there was an undercurrent of excitement. It was Friday the 13th, and some of my more superstitious co-workers were swapping stories of past misfortunes. I rolled my eyes, never one for such nonsense. "Guys, it's just another day," I said, booting up my computer. "The only bad luck will be missing the deadline on the Henderson account." My team lead, Sarah, overheard and approached my desk. "About that," she said, her expression serious. "We need those reports finished by Monday morning. Think you can stay late and wrap it up?" I nodded. seeing an opportunity to score some points. No problem. I'll get it done. The day flew by in a flurry of meetings and data entry. Before I knew it, the office was emptying out, my colleagues calling cheerful goodbyes as they headed off to start their weekends. Soon, I was alone, the quiet hum of the air conditioning the only sound breaking the silence. I stretched, cracked my knuckles, and dove back into work. Hours passed, the sky outside my window growing dark. I was in the zone, barely noticing as the cleaning crew came and went. It wasn't until my stomach growled that I realized how late it had gotten. Glancing at my watch, I was shocked to see it was nearly midnight. I saved my work and stood up, deciding to grab a snack from the vending machine before finishing up. That's when I noticed something odd. The security cameras in the corners of the office were moving, their red lights blinking rapidly. I frowned, approaching one for a closer look. They were supposed to be stationary, weren't they? As I watched, the camera swiveled to face me directly. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't normal. I hurried back to my desk, suddenly eager to leave. But as I gathered my things, the lights flickered, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the office in an eerie red glow. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast, empty space. "Security? Is anyone there?" No response. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Cursing under my breath, I decided to head for the stairs. As I approached the stairwell, I heard a sound that made me freeze in my tracks. Footsteps, coming from the floor above. My heart raced. I was supposed to be the only one here. The cleaning crew had left hours ago, and security did their rounds on the ground floor. So who, or what, was up there? Against my better judgment, I found myself moving towards the elevator. I needed to know what was going on. The doors opened with a soft ding, and I stepped inside, my finger hovering over the button for the floor above. Just as the doors were closing, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the polished metal walls. A figure, standing right behind me. I spun around, but the elevator was empty. My hands shaking, I pressed the button for the lobby. I needed to get out of here, now, but the elevator had other ideas. It started moving up instead of down. The doors opened on the floor above, revealing a scene that made no sense. The office layout was the same, but everything looked wrong. Desks were overturned, papers scattered everywhere, and the walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. I stumbled out of the elevator, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. I must have fallen asleep at my desk. This was just a bizarre dream. But the cold floor beneath my feet and the rapid beating of my heart told me this was all too real. As I stood there, paralyzed with fear and confusion, I heard a noise coming from the conference room. Slowly, I crept towards it, peering through the glass walls. What I saw inside defied explanation. My co-workers, the same people I'd said goodbye to hours earlier, were there, but they weren't themselves. They moved in jerky, unnatural ways, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. And in the center of the room, projected on the wall, was a swirling vortex of colors I had no names for. I must have made a sound, because suddenly, all their heads turned towards me in perfect unison. I ran. Back at the elevator, I frantically pressed the call button. As I waited, I could hear them coming, their footsteps echoing in the empty office. Just as they rounded the corner, the doors opened, and I threw myself inside. But my relief was short-lived. As the elevator descended, the lights flickered again. When they came back on, I found myself face to face with Sarah, my team lead. Only it wasn't Sarah, not really. Her eyes were black voids, and when she smiled, her teeth were razor-sharp. "Going somewhere?" she asked, her voice a distorted version of its usual self. The meeting's just getting started. I pressed myself against the wall, searching desperately for a way out. "What's going on? What are you?" Sarah, or the thing wearing Sarah's face, laughed. We've always been here, watching, waiting. Your world is so limited. We're here to expand it. The elevator stopped. The doors opening to reveal the lobby. But it was wrong, twisted. The security desk was manned by a creature with too many limbs. Its head swiveling to face me with a sickening crack. I ran again, my legs burning as I sprinted for the main doors. But no matter how fast I ran, they seemed to get no closer. It was like running on a treadmill, the exit always just out of reach. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder, spinning me around. I found myself surrounded by my co-workers, or what used to be my co-workers. Their faces were melting, reforming into impossible shapes. "Join us," they said in unison, their voices a cacophony of inhuman sounds. "See what lies beyond." I closed my eyes, certain this was the end. But then, "Hey, wake up." My eyes snapped open. I was at my desk, drool pooling on my keyboard. The night security guard was standing over me, a concerned look on his face. "You okay, buddy? It's 3 a.m. You were thrashing around pretty bad there." I looked around, my heart still racing. The office was normal. No strange symbols, no twisted versions of my co-workers. Just the usual late-night quiet. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. "Just a bad dream, I guess." The guard nodded sympathetically. "Friday the 13th, man. Does weird things to people. Why don't you head home and get some real sleep?" I nodded, gathering my things. As I waited for the elevator, I couldn't shake the lingering unease from my dream. It had felt so real. The doors opened, and I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. As they closed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished metal. For just a second, my eyes looked pitch black. I blinked, and they were normal again. Must be a trick of the light, I told myself. Just leftover jitters from the nightmare. But as I drove home, I couldn't help but wonder, what if it wasn't just a dream? What if, for a few hours, I had glimpsed something beyond our normal reality? I never stayed late at the office again after that night. And every time I passed the conference room, I can't help but glance inside, half expecting to see that swirling vortex. Because the truth is, I'm not sure what's real anymore. And in the back of my mind, I can still hear their voices, calling me to join them, to see what lies beyond. Maybe next time, I'll say yes.